What I'm going to do now is demo how to use the WindowBuilder plugin within Eclipse to help us design our GUIs and then set up the listeners and respond to the events for a GUI application. Within Eclipse, you'll need to go ahead and make sure that the WindowBuilder plugin is installed, and in the homework I'll provide a link where you can install that. But on some of the newer versions of Eclipse, if you install the Eclipse for Java developers, the WindowBuilder plugin should come installed with it. Now I've went ahead and created a new project here. I don't have any source code, but I'm going to go ahead and use the plugin to help me create a JFrame, add a label, and add a couple buttons and respond then to the button clicks. Within my source folder here, I'm going to do a right click on New. In this instance, I'm going to click on Other. When I click on Other, there are several different plugin templates that can help me create some classes here. Now, one of those that may come installed on your Eclipse version is one called GUI Forms. I do not want you selecting that one, but if you scroll down, there's actually a WindowBuilder folder. Within there, there are several different templates that you can use. If you click on the Swing Designer, and then what I want you to click on is JFrame. There are other types of templates that can be used, but for our purposes, we're always going to select JFrame. Click on Next. We can put in our package name. GUI demo, and then we're just going to call this controller package. Please note that using the WindowBuilder, that it combines both the controller and the view into a single class. So in that MVC pattern that was mentioned in the other lecture, this is more just a view controller and the model. I'll give this a class name. We'll call it, see, my first GUI. We will then click on Finish. It's going to come and then generate a class here. Notice this particular class extends the JFrame class. It's set up a content pane here. It has some code in here to set the size, set up some information about our particular frame that we're creating. If I click then on the design, it's going to bring up an interface that lets me be able to select and put controls on our particular frame. Now let me go ahead and close this out so we can see a little bit more in our view. Now, one thing I want to note that when you're using the WindowBuilder, there are some settings that we want to use. So if we come down to Window and go to Preferences, you only need to set this one time. And then within here, you can come down and select WindowBuilder. This is for the WindowBuilder plugin. Within there, we want to select the swing. If we wanted to change what the default width and height of our form, we can modify a lot of different values within here. But what I'm most interested right now is in the code generation. If you come to the code generation in the variable generation, for the field, verify and make sure that the prefix field accessed with this is selected. And then for the init field, make sure that that is also selected there. There are some other options that you can customize. For example, how you want the event handling for events that have been fired to be handled. I had shown you in the previous lecture on how to do that with using the listener interface and implementing that within the parent class. But a very common way is to create an anonymous inner class to do that, and then you can actually create an inner class. I will show you the difference between these two approaches, or actually these three approaches, after we build our first GUI app. So click on OK. Now when I come back in here, here is my GUI. If I want to add, for example, some type of component to it, I can come here and click on JLabel, come over here, and notice it's already selected a layout manager for me. So I can just come in here, click on that. Now this has added a label for me. How I want this label to be referenced within my program, I can specify in this properties pane here a lot of different properties within this design view right here. So here it's giving it label, new label. I'm going to call this label display. If I wanted to change any other properties, I can do some things with that. If I want to change the text, I will come here and say button display text. I'll just give it some type of name. Now I'm going to add a button to add that. Add my button. So I'll click on a particular region that I want to do that. So let's say I want my button added here. Notice this added a big button. And this is what happens with these layout managers, is it tries to take care of how the controls are going to be displayed. So I'm going to call this button hit me. I can set the text there. Notice when I do that over here in this properties window, it changed that. I'm going to add one more button here. Click me. Notice over here we've got button click me. Over here on this one I got a button hit me. Now if I come back and I look at the source, we're going to notice that it has created and added data members to our class to create these buttons. It has then come down here and added these buttons to our content pane. So it went ahead and added those. Now if I come back here to my design, and I come back to my content pane, notice here there is a layout property, and right now it's set to the border layout, which define those regions there. If I want to change to a different layout manager, I can come in here and say I want to see what it looks like with a flow layout. Notice here it changes this layout for me. If I come back to the code over here, you're going to notice that it's changed the actual layout manager that we're going to be using. If I come back to the design view here, and I'm going to select absolute layout. What this does is then when I come in here, I can come in and actually drag and drop exactly where I want these particular buttons. The buttons aren't going to move around regardless of how I change the size of my frame. So a lot of times we'll use the absolute layout if we want things to stay in a static position regardless of how the user changes the size of our frame that we're dealing with. Okay, now that I have a basic display up here, I need to set up some event listeners. So to do that, I right-click on my button, go down to Add an Event Handler, and we want to listen for the action. Remember our action performed. So if we hit here, Add Event Handler, if we click on Action, what you're not seeing is what pops up over here is an action performed item. Go ahead and select that. What that does is it comes in for the button hit me. It adds code to add our action listener. Now in the example code in the slides, we passed in this, which means I want this particular class to be the action listener. So that means we have to implement the action listener interface and add the action perform method. In here, what I'm doing is actually creating a class within my method invocation. This is known as an anonymous class. You may hear it as an anonymous inner class. Notice here it says new action listener. This here is a class that we're creating on the fly. That's why it's called an anonymous class. So this here is a class definition. When we implement the action listener, it requires us to implement the action performed method. So I can come now within this method and modify or take whatever action I'm going to do. So in this particular instance, I want to come in and set my label text. So here we have label display. So I can say label display dot, we'll call the set text method, and we'll just say hit me clicked. And let me take care of my compilation error. Now notice up here we want everything preferenced with the word this if it's a data member. But if I put this dot in front of my label display, because we have defined a new class on the fly here, this is actually referring to this new action listener class. It's going to say label display is not defined. So if I want to access the label display of my parent class here, what I need to do is remove the word this, and then in scope it's going to say, well, label display wasn't defined here. Is this defined within the class that I'm contained within? So it's going to go up and get this label display. All right, so once we have this, I can go ahead and execute my program. So I'm going to execute it. It launches our GUI here. And if I click the hit button, the event's fired, and now it says hit me clicked. So I can come into back to my design view and work with the click me, add the event handler, add the action, add the action performed. Again, it's going to set up a new anonymous class here. This is where I'm going to come in and set my text here. So this is button click me. So I'm going to say click me, click. This is the click me button. So now I'll run my application. I come in here, I hit click. You'll see how the text has changed. All right, so that's how we can use the GUI builder and help us create the GUI design. I do encourage you to use the absolute layout. Let's say we come back here and I want to set the title of this frame. I can say that and say my first GUI by WindowBuilder. Set that, come back, execute the program. Now it's going to set the title for my frame. So I can use the properties to do a lot of customization for the type of components that I have on my GUI. Now I also want to come in here and show you another example of how the window builder can generate our event listeners a little bit differently. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I'm going to come in. I'm going to make a new class again, but this time remember I hit other. I go down to my window builder, select on JFrame, click next. Go my second GUI, click on finish. I'm going to come up to window preferences. Now for the event handlers, I'm going to say actually implement the listener interface in the parent class. So it's going to generate my event handling code a little bit differently. I'll click on OK. I'll come over to my design view, minimize this window. I'm going to go ahead select my content pane and say that I want this to go ahead and be an absolute layout. I'm going to select on a component here. Let me minimize that. Select JLabel. my labels. This is output label. I'm going to go ahead and add a button. Just add the button there. I'll say click me. I'm going to add my event handler, so action performed. Notice here, when I've done that, I've come in here and it said add action listener. It's added this to it. So up here it says I've implemented the action listener. Because I'm not using the anonymous class approach, when I select it in the event handling generation code, it's going to actually implement the action listener. This is like the code that I demonstrated in the previous lecture. So then I can come down here and say this dot label output label dot set text button was clicked. Go ahead and add it and click and hit on click me. So this, in this particular instance, the event handling was generated by actually implementing the interface within the class. Again, that was specified by coming up to Window, Preferences, and selecting how we want our event code generation to take place. You will see a lot in example code of using either anonymous classes or implementing the listener interface. Now if I come back to my design view here, add a second button. Let me say hit me. Going to add an event handler action performed. Now it's already added that one. So this is where I'm going to have to come in here and add set the action command. Notice here that for button click and for button hit me, it's added the action listener, but they're both going to invoke this particular method here. So if I were to execute this right now, when I come in here, whether I hit click me or hit me, text is the same there because they're both going to the same action perform method, and this is the output that's being taken. So if I wanted to respond, I forgot which control fired that event, this is where I'll come in and say set button click me dot set action command, and I can put in a string there, and I can say, for example, click. And then I'll do the same thing for button hit me. Except we're going to call this hit. Now I can come down here and get my actual command that was sent in. So to do that, I can use the method that's associated with the action event. Called string, let's call this event name equals arg0. Let's make this a little bit more meaningful name here. Let's call this event action get action command. Once I have that, then I can do a event name dot equals, ignore case, click. Now what I would want to do is actually define the click and the hit as constants and then use those the constant variables here and here, so we don't have to worry about incorrectly typing in string literals. So then I can say here click was clicked. And I can come in here and add an else on that, say else if event name equals hit, say hit was clicked. I come back out to our design view. I'm going to make this label a little bit bigger. Back to the source, save this, and click hit. Because I have added in my code the set action command within my action perform method, then I have to be able to get the action command out to see which control actually fired the event. This is why you'll see more often than not that most of the code that is generated in these GUI builders will use the anonymous class, so you don't have to come in and add some other code to figure out which control fired the event. Now the last example I want to look at here is looking at it of creating an inner class. So let me go ahead and delete this. So we're going to go down to new, we're going to go down to other because we want to use the window builder. So we got window builder, swing designer, JFrame, click next. My third GUI, click on finish. Let me go to our preferences, event handlers, and say this time we're going to create an inner class. When we generate these, come back to our design, select the container. I'm going to go ahead and go to absolute layout. Come down to my components, click on JLabel. Let me add a label. Output is, change the size of that label. Go ahead and add a button here called Hit Me. Add another button called Click Me. Now when I add the event handler, add event handler for the action command, we're going to select action performed. Now notice here, to add the action listener said new button hit me action listener. When that is now hit, it has created a new, what we call an inner class. So this is a class within the My Third GUI class. Notice that it's called a private class, so we don't have access to that. So with this one, I can then come in here and say, what is my label? Output is set text. And this is for the hit me. So I'm now setting that label. If I come back to my design and for click me, go to add event handler, action performed. You can do a similar thing, except we want to use the word click me. So if I go ahead and run this, and I come in here, hit me, click me, hit me, click me. So that's an example of using and creating an inner class to respond to our event handling. Again, I recommend that you use the anonymous class. So set your window preferences, event handlers, create anonymous class to do this. But again, it's a little bit preference. Some people find the anonymous class very hard to read, but using the window builder, it gives you the option to generate the event handling code however you wish, whether that's through an anonymous class, an inner class, or actually implementing the interface within the class itself. So that shows you how to do it. Last thing I want to touch base on here is that if you were to use the model, you would then create your model class here and create an instance of that, and then invoke the various methods to have your model do what it needs to do, and then have it return the results and then display those results within your GUI. Or this view controller class is actually going to collaborate with the model class. So you have to create an instance of the model class to interact with it, to send data to it, have it process it, and get data back to display in your GUI. Again, the GUI builder class combines the view and the controller actions into a single class. So that's a quick little demo of using the window builder to help you build a GUI application you'll get some more practice with this in the homework exercise.